Snow fell with the silence of forgiveness, veiling the broken town of Hollow Bend in soft white mercy. It drifted over rooftops warped with age, settled into the gnarled hands of fence posts, and blurred the sharp outlines of a world that often looked too closely at the wounded. The wind carried no words, only the ache of winter pressing into every brittle crack of the street. And beneath that hush, she walked, if one could call it walking. Clementine moved like a woman untethered, her boots long lost, her threadbare skirt stiff with frost. Each breath came shallow and sharp, and the sack around her shoulders, stitched from potato cloth, clung to her like the last lie she could carry. Her fingers, blue at the tips, grasped the edge of Nettie Parsons' bakery, where a sliver of warmth escaped the door. No one opened it. She didn't knock. She couldn't. Rejection stung colder than snow. The town had heard the tale, or invented their own. The banker's daughter who fell hard, whose father's debts dragged them down like stones in river mud. Folks said she squandered wealth, dignity, and virtue in equal measure. No one cared that she hadn't eaten in 3 days. Hunger didn't make good gossip. Scandal did. A boy came past with a sled. He looked at her, then away. Her shadow stretched behind her, thin and shaky. It fell into the alley like a ghost too ashamed to follow. She reached the livery, staggered against the wood wall, and slid to the ground. Snow laced her lashes like spun sugar. She did not cry. Not yet. Her body was too tired for sorrow. Just as her eyes began to close, she heard hooves, heavy and slow, like thunder muffled by velvet. The horse was pale as bone, its breath misting in the air. And on its back sat a man who did not flinch at the cold. He was shirtless. His chest bore the marks of fire and time, scars that told of blades and claws and men who lost to him. His arms were thick as yoke beams, his skin the color of rich river stone. Long black hair streamed behind him like a warrior's pennant, and snow clung to the beads in his war bonnet. He did not speak. He dismounted with the ease of one used to silence, to solitude, to never asking permission. And when he knelt before her, the snow paused between them, midair, as if uncertain whether to fall or float. Their eyes met. Hers were green once, now dull with frostbite and fear. His were dark, bottomless, and for a moment she felt no judgment in them. Just seeing. And something older than pity. He pulled the great fur cloak from his shoulders and wrapped it around her. The weight of it made her gasp. It smelled of cedar smoke and animal musk, and something strangely safe. Her lips parted. A sound began, but she had forgotten what words were good for. He lifted her then, as if she were not full of shame and hunger, and every small indignity she'd been forced to swallow. In his arms, the world tilted. Lanterns flickered as they passed. A curtain twitched at the general store. Somewhere behind them, a voice muttered, "That's Blackthorn. The Apache giant. Why would he?" But the snow erased most sentences before they could fully land. He walked without hurry, his bare chest steaming slightly against the wind. Clementine lay against him, eyes fluttering open, then shut, as the cold in her body met the warmth of his. Her fingers curled near the amulet around his neck, a carved piece of elk bone, worn smooth. They reached the edge of town, where the world grew quiet again. The woods thickened, and beyond them, a cabin waited. She didn't know this man's name, nor why he stopped. She only knew the ache had quieted. Inside the cabin, the fire was already lit. A low, steady blaze danced inside a stone hearth, casting flickers across rough-hewn walls. He lowered her onto a cot covered in hides, her body trembling as if waking from a long, cruel dream. The cloak he'd wrapped her in he now spread over her fully, then turned to the fire, feeding its cedar branches. He moved with the calm of someone who didn't fear the night. Her voice rasped, a whisper made of sand. "Why?" He didn't answer at first. Instead, he ladled something from a pot, broth, thick and bone-rich, and held the cup toward her. She took it. Steam rose between them. Her hands shook as she sipped. When she looked back up, he spoke. His voice was low and even. "You look like something that shouldn't die yet." No more. No less. She didn't know how to answer that. She blinked. Let the broth warm her from within. She wasn't sure if it was mercy or madness. He offered no name, no questions. Only stillness. The next morning, she woke to find bread and salted meat wrapped in cloth. A basin of warm water. A single braid of her hair tucked gently behind her ear. She touched it with disbelief. No man had dared touch her gently since her father lost everything. He sat by the window, sharpening a blade. Shirtless still. The snow outside glowed pale blue, like a memory of peace. Her voice, hoarse but more steady, broke the quiet. "What do you want from me?" He turned his head slightly, not all the way. "You'll see." "Are you keeping me?" Her words almost a challenge. He met her eyes this time. Only snow keeps what it buries. A silence passed. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said, "I need an heir." She scoffed. A dry, bitter sound. "And I'm what you picked." He didn't flinch. "I didn't pick. The storm did." Later, as night fell again, she sat by the fire while he carved something from wood. A cradle perhaps, though she couldn't be sure. Her fingers played absently with the silver comb in her skirt pocket. One broken tooth, edges dull from years of carrying. She almost handed it to him. Almost. Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside, the silence no longer felt hollow. And when she glanced at him once more, his jaw set, eyes fixed on his work, she wondered if survival had a face after all. Not gentle. Not soft. But strong enough to lift her when she couldn't crawl. In the firelight, her lips parted again. "Do you have a name?" "Blackthorn," he said. She nodded slowly. "Clementine." Their names hung in the air like breath. And somewhere beyond the walls of the cabin, the townspeople began to murmur. But in here, only the flames listened. And the cradle between them, still unfinished, rocked slightly from the wind. Smoke curled from the hearth like a lazy spirit, drawing slow ribbons above the cedar fire. The flames crackled low, casting gold against the cabin's pine walls, and the scent of smoke mixed with broth and winter-soaked wool. Outside, the snow deepened, muffling the world in a hush so complete it made the wind sound like breath. Inside, Clementine sat cross-legged on a buffalo hide, her hands wrapped around a clay cup, steam softening the raw pink of her knuckles. She hadn't yet decided whether this place was sanctuary or cage. Seco Blackthorn, the giant Apache with fire-kissed scars and a quiet that seemed older than the mountains, was across the room, crouched at the fire. Shirtless still. He moved with the precision of someone used to being watched, even when he wasn't. Clementine noticed how he stirred the pot with the back of his hand bandaged, as if he'd struck something harder than wood earlier, and hadn't mentioned it. She hadn't asked what. "You should have let me die in the snow," she murmured, not looking at him. The words were soft, not dramatic, like someone stating a fact they'd lived with too long. He didn't turn. "Snow's honest. It kills for survival. People kill for shame." That startled her enough to glance up. "You think I'm shameful?" "I think you were hunted by people more cruel than winter." She blinked. A strange tightness crawled up her throat. No one had ever named it so plainly. Seco rose and walked to the corner where deer hides were stretched for drying. He began checking the tension of each with a glance. The air between them held a pulse now, quiet but unmistakable. "You said you needed an heir," she said finally. He paused. "Yes." Her voice lowered. "And you meant to get one from me?" His back stayed to her, but his words floated back. "I don't take what isn't given. The fire keeps you warm. You chose to stay close." She swallowed hard. "And if I choose to leave?" His shoulders rose and fell. "Then I'll bury the cradle." A silence fell between them, longer than the ones before. The kind that feels like walking through a fog, where you don't know whether you're being followed or simply forgotten. She stood, slowly. Her legs still shaky from cold-starved muscle, but gaining resolve. Her pale fingers reached for the comb again, the one she'd nearly handed him last night. She didn't offer it now. She turned it in her palm like a talisman, watching the firelight flicker on its dented edge. "My father used to comb my hair with this," she said suddenly. "When I was little. Before the money dried up. Before the men came with papers and ropes and smiled as they took everything." Seco didn't speak. "I held on to it," she whispered. Because I thought someone might remember who I was. When she looked up, he was standing before her. He didn't ask to take the comb. He didn't say a single thing. He just reached out, slow and certain, and gently tucked a lock of her hair behind her ear with 2 fingers roughened by storms and silence. And in that gesture, something shifted in her. Not lust. Not even comfort. Recognition. Siko turned and returned to the fire. He ladled more broth into her cup and set it on the wooden crate beside her. Then, from a carved shelf, he pulled out a flat wooden box and opened it. Inside were pieces of things: buttons, bones, carved beads and bits of wire. A collection of forgotten parts. From it, he lifted a long needle and fine thread. He repaired the comb in 3 quiet motions. She stared. You fixed it. I restored it. The wind howled against the cabin like something angry at being locked out. She took the comb back with both hands, cradling it like a relic. Why? Because you are still yours, he said simply. That night, she lay curled on the cot near the fire, his fur cloak pulled up to her chin. She couldn't sleep. The wind moaned in the rafters. Her mind wandered back to the boys in town who used to bring her candies and compliments, to the banker's parlor where she once played piano. And then, to the night it all collapsed, when fire claimed their home and shame swept her name from every kind mouth. Now here she was, nothing left but frostbitten fingers and a comb she no longer had to hide. She turned to look at Siko, who sat near the fire sharpening a long blade by firelight. His face was unreadable in shadow. Strong. Worn. Like a statue made of something warmer than stone. I don't think I can give you a child, she said quietly. He looked up. Not startled. Not scolding. Just present. Why? He asked. Because I'm broken. She blinked fast. Maybe not inside, but something's missing. I've been told it before. His hand stilled on the blade. A womb is not what makes a woman worthy. I said I need an heir, not a servant. Tears stung her eyes. Then what is it you really want? He answered so softly she almost missed it. Legacy. Not just of blood. Of care. Her lips trembled. And you think I'm capable of that? I think the snow didn't kill you. That answer landed like thunder wrapped in wool. Later that night, he laid an extra hide over her without waking her. Sat by the fire, unmoving, until the first light crept through the frost-rimmed windows. The next morning, she helped grind cornmeal without being asked. Her hands moved slower than his, but steadier now. He passed her a pair of boots, too large, stuffed with dried moss. She smiled faintly. Not a thank you, just the kind of smile people save for things they don't think they deserve. Outside, the snow still fell. But inside the cabin, a fire burned steadily. Not roaring. Not loud. Just warm enough to stay. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like something that needed saving. Just something beginning again. By the time the third morning lit the snow in shades of pearl and pewter, Clementine no longer flinched when she woke in warmth. Her breath no longer fogged from her lips like smoke from a dying wick. The fire in Siko's hearth had become familiar, like the slow heartbeat of a house that finally welcomed her as something more than an intruder. She stood barefoot on the fur rug, her cheeks touched with new color, and kneaded the dough he had set out for her. He had not asked, but something about his quiet expectation, the unspoken way he placed the flour sack beside her, laid out the mixing bowl, spoke of trust. Trust, she thought, is quieter than love. But deeper. Siko moved outside, chopping wood with a single-handled axe that bit clean through the thick pine logs. His bare back glistened faintly from effort, though the air was still cold enough to make trees groan. Clementine watched him through the frost-laced window, a strange ache rising in her chest. He was unlike any man she had ever known, neither demanding nor distant. Just present. Still. Unmoved by her broken edges. She turned back to the dough, shaping it into loaves with her palms. As she moved, her fingers brushed against an old scar on her forearm, one she never told anyone about. It was the only mark left from the night she'd tried to steal bread from a merchant's cart and was caught. The memory flared, hot and shameful, but this time, it passed. The shame didn't stick as deeply. The man she'd stolen from had eyes like judgment. Seiko had eyes like mountains, unchanging, but not cruel. Later that day, she walked into town with a basket. Seiko had given no orders, only said, "If you're ready." She had nodded. She needed to know if the world outside would look at her differently now, or exactly the same. As she stepped down Main Street, wearing the fur-lined cloak he'd lent her and boots several sizes too big, voices drifted from the saloon like sour smoke. "Well, look who thawed out of Blackthorn's cabin," someone called. "Corbin Fry. Always the first to mock and the last to bleed. Girl went in like a stray dog and comes out wearin' pelts. Guess she's his heir maker now." Laughter followed, not cruel but careless, worse in some ways. It was the kind of laughter that made you feel like dust under a boot, not even worth the spit of real hate. Clementine didn't stop walking. But her knuckles tightened around the basket handle. Her ears burned. At Nettie's bakery, she was met with a tight-lipped nod. The old woman passed her a sack of stale rolls. "Leftovers," she muttered, then added, more softly, "for the man who brought you back breathing." Clementine whispered thanks and turned to go. Behind her, she heard Nettie say to another, "Don't matter what she did before. He's fed her. That means something." Still, the walk back to the woods felt heavier than it should have. By the time she returned, her shoulders were dusted with snow, and her mood darker than the clouds overhead. She found Seiko inside, gutting a rabbit with precise, unhurried movements. The fire snapped beside him. He looked up once, registered her face, and said nothing. "I heard what they said," she blurted. "They think I'm yours. Like a prize you claimed." Seiko cleaned his hands. "And what do you think?" "I think. I've been owned before. I know what that feels like. This isn't it. But it doesn't stop the shame." He nodded once. "Shame doesn't need truth. Only witnesses." She sank down beside the hearth, her hands trembling. "They'll never let me be anything more than what they believe." He handed her the repaired comb. "Then let your hands prove them wrong." She stared at the comb in her palm. Then rose. She stepped into the corner, removed her cloak, and sat before a small shard of mirror hung on the log wall. The comb slid through her hair like it belonged. And with each pass, her posture straightened a little more. That night, she baked bread. The scent filled the cabin, heady and golden. She folded herbs into one loaf, wild berries into another. Her fingertips found rhythm in the dough, a sacred sort of memory rising in her bones. She remembered her mother's voice saying, "A woman's worth is in what she builds with empty hands." Seiko sat watching, unmoving but watchful. When she placed the warm bread between them, he said, "You made more than food." She met his eyes. "I needed to remember what I can offer." They ate in silence, but not the kind that hurt. After, she stepped out into the snow to fetch water. The cold bit sharply, sharper than expected. She slipped on the frozen path, slicing her palm against a stone. Blood mingled with ice. When she returned, her breath ragged, Seiko stood immediately. He took her hand with surprising gentleness, turned it toward the light. The cut wasn't deep, but the sight of her blood in his palm made something in his face change. Without words, he cleaned and wrapped it, brow furrowed. Not with annoyance but worry. She felt the heat of it in his touch. Her throat tightened. "I'm not used to someone caring when I bleed. I'm not used to someone telling me how," he said. The room quieted again. But this time, it felt like a bond had been forged, not broken. She sat back, watching him tend the fire, her bandaged hand resting in her lap. For the first time, she saw the faintest limp in his step, a ghost of a wound-healed wrong. She had never asked what he'd lost in his wars. Now she didn't need to. Pain recognized pain. As the fire dimmed into coals, Clementine leaned against the logs stacked by the wall and whispered, "I'm still not sure why you chose me." Seiko didn't look up, just said, "Because you didn't ask what you had to do in return." She let that settle in her chest like a final warm sip of tea. The town might not forget who she'd been. But here in this cabin, her worth was being rewritten. Not in grand gestures, but in bread and blood and the quiet will to stay. And she intended to stay. If the world out there wanted to call her his, let them. She'd already chosen herself first. And that, she thought as snow fell quietly outside, was the beginning of something worth building. The wind had changed. Clementine felt it before she heard it, before the pines outside whispered it along their frost-bitten spines. It moved lower now, not in howls, but in long sighs, like the land was exhaling after holding something too long. The storm was weakening. But something inside her was only beginning to stir. She sat near the hearth again, the mended comb resting beside her. Her fingers moved through a bundle of worn thread, stitching patches into one of Tsiko's old shirts. It was work she hadn't been asked to do, but it gave her hands purpose. It gave her stillness a shape. Tsiko entered from the cold, snowflakes melting against his bare skin, his hair half damp from chopping. He carried no words with him, just wood, and the quiet rhythm of footsteps that made her body loosen without realizing. She didn't look up. You shouldn't be out there without something on your back. He set the logs down. Frost hasn't killed me yet. I don't want to be the first thing here that does. His brow lifted faintly, but he didn't argue. They passed the next hour in silence, the kind that had become strangely intimate. It was not the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of two people who understood words weren't always needed to build a bridge. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer, yet firm. Do you still mean it? She asked, eyes fixed on the needle in her hand. Mean what? That you need an heir. He paused at the stove, lifting the kettle from its hook. Yes. And that you wanted it with me. Yes. She looked up then. Her face had changed over the past days, not in beauty, but in bearing. She was no longer curled in on herself like something waiting to be kicked. She sat tall now, shoulders straight, voice clear. Then I need to ask something before I answer. He turned to her fully. Is this about need? Or is it about want? Tsiko crossed the room and sat opposite her. The fire between them made shadows dance across his jaw and chest. He watched her for a long moment before answering. Both, he said. Her throat tightened. I don't want to belong to someone who thinks of me as utility. He nodded once, slow. You were never mine to use. You walked into this cabin. You stayed. I did not tie you here. But the town says I'm yours now. He met her gaze, calm and steady. Then let them speak. They've built their voices louder than their own hearts. She hesitated. Her next words were thin, uncertain. What would it mean to you, to take me as wife? His voice dropped. It would mean I name you before wind, fire, and ancestors. It would mean you are not the woman I found in the snow, but the woman I choose beside the fire. She stared at him. Her breath stilled. He reached beside him then, pulled something from the leather pouch hanging by the wall. It was a small carved band. Polished, warm-toned wood with a single turquoise stone in the center. She could smell the cedar oil on it, the care in its making. He set it on the crate between them. Said nothing. Her hands remained folded in her lap. You made this? She asked. I carved it before you came. For a woman who might never exist. Not until now. She reached toward it, then stopped. Her hand hovered above the ring, as if afraid to disturb the stillness of the moment. Then she whispered, Clementine Evely Ray. Tsiko's brow lifted. My name, she said. All of it. Not the one the town scorns. The one my mother whispered into my ear when I cried. She slid the ring into her palm, held it, but didn't put it on. I'm not saying yes yet, she said. Not until I believe I belong to myself again. He nodded, and in that nod there was no pressure. Only patience. The next day, she walked into town again. She wore her own dress this time, patched and cleaned, and her hair was plaited tightly back. No cloak. She walked straight through the saloon, past Corbin Fry and the others. Their laughter stilled like wind snapped off at the root. She stopped in front of Sheriff Amos Hale. I'm living with Blackthorn, she said. I cook. I clean. He has not touched me without cause. He is the first man who has not. Amos stared at her. I never asked. You should have. before you let the others spit my name like tobacco." The sheriff gave a long, tired sigh. "Folks speak. They always will. And I'll speak back. From now on." She turned and walked out, and though her hands trembled, her spine did not. That evening, she returned to the cabin and found it empty. The fire still burned. The kettle still steamed. But Siko was gone. Her heart stammered. She stepped outside, snow crunching beneath her boots, and followed the tracks. They led toward the high ridge above the cabin, where trees thinned and the stars poured over the hill like spilled silver. There, she found him. He was kneeling before a small circle of stones, smoke rising from a sacred fire. Bundles of sage burned at the edges. In his hands, a feather and a bit of hide. She didn't speak. He said softly, "I told them your name." She stepped closer. "My name?" He nodded. "To the ancestors. To the wind. So that when the time comes, the child we raise will know she was born from more than survival. She was born from choosing." Clementine's breath caught. "You said she." "I dreamed of her." A beat passed. Then she opened her palm and showed him the ring. "I want to earn this," she said. "Not because I'm broken, but because I've begun healing in your stillness." She held it out, and instead of putting it on her finger, he placed it back in her hand and closed her fingers around it. "Then wear it when you're ready." They stood there in the snow, under the breath of a wind that no longer felt bitter, but like something beginning again. Back inside, as she folded his shirt and set it beside the bed, she whispered to herself, "He never called me his. He called me chosen." And in that difference, she found everything. The blizzard returned without warning. Snow struck the windows like thrown fists, and the fire in the hearth stuttered as the wind bellowed through the cabin's cracks. Clementine stood by the table, one hand resting on the comb he'd mended, the other clutching the wooden ring he hadn't forced on her finger. It was strange, how storms arrived just when you thought you'd begun to breathe again. As if the sky remembered it still had something to say. Siko was gone. He'd left before sunrise to check the traps in the northern ridge, refusing her offer to go along. "Stay warm," he'd said, as if those two words could hold back every ghost still haunting her ribs. Now the snow was thickening, swallowing the trees whole. Her eyes scanned the window again, searching for a shape that didn't come. By midday, the silence turned to dread. She pulled on his old wool shirt and boots that barely fit, slung the hide cloak over her shoulders, and stepped into the white. The world outside was barely there. Just outlines. Ghosts. The wind screamed like a wounded thing. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps as she followed the faintest trail. Siko's heavy boot prints, nearly erased by the hour. Her fingers numbed. Her legs burned. But her mind stayed sharp, focused, like it had back when hunger was the only god she knew. She would find him. She would bring him back. Halfway up the ridge, the snow deepened to her knees. The forest moaned as trees bent under the weight. She called his name once. Nothing. Again. The wind ate it. And then, she saw the red. A streak across the white. Bright and cruel. She ran. Siko lay at the base of a rock ledge, half covered in snow, a dead wolf beside him. Its body was enormous, gray matted, jaws still parted as if in the middle of a snarl. His knife was embedded deep in its chest. Blood fanned across the snow like a dark wing. He was breathing. Barely. She fell beside him, hands clumsy, panicked. "Siko," she whispered, then louder. "Siko, open your eyes, please." His eyes cracked open. A thin smile twitched his lips. "Cradle," he murmured. "Not finished." "Don't you dare," she said, voice trembling. "Don't you dare speak like you're leaving." The snow pelted them harder. She bound his leg with torn strips of her cloak, then pulled his arm over her shoulder and heaved. Step by brutal step, she dragged him. They fell. Twice. But she stood again. The woman who once couldn't lift her own name off the ground now bore the weight of the man who'd given her silence instead of shame. Her fingers bled. Her lips split from cold. Still she walked. By dusk, the cabin came into view, a blur of dark lines against the white. Inside, she collapsed beside him near the fire. Her body shook from exhaustion, her mouth too dry to cry. But her hands, those hands, moved like they belonged to a woman who had always known how to keep someone alive. She dressed the wound, stoked the fire, pulled his heavy body closer to the warmth. When he opened his eyes again, she was already feeding him broth. "You came," he rasped. "You didn't leave me in the snow," she answered. "I was never going to leave you in it either." He reached for her hand, held it with surprising strength. "There is something I need to ask." She leaned close. "If I don't wake, you will." "If I don't," he continued slower, "promise me you'll stay. Finish what we began. Raise the child, if there is one. And if not, raise the fire." She pressed her forehead to his. "There will be a child," she whispered. "Even if I must birth it in story, not blood. But you're not dying. Not tonight." And he didn't. By dawn, the fever broke. He slept for hours, breathing deep. Clementine sat beside him, combing his hair back, humming the lullaby her mother used to sing when nights grew cruel. When he finally stirred, he opened his eyes to find her wearing the ring. She said nothing, just laid her hand over his. A week later, they returned to town. Together. The wind was gentler now, more curious than cruel. Clementine wore a long wool dress sewn from patchwork, salvaged from pieces she'd once hidden in shame. Her hair was braided down her back, and her boots no longer slipped. She stood beside him not as someone rescued, but as someone chosen. The townsfolk watched in wary silence as they walked past. At the sheriff's post, Clementine paused. "Is there a law against hope?" she asked Amos Hale. The sheriff blinked. "Hope? Because we've decided to build some." "No law yet," he said, almost smiling. At the saloon, Corbin Fry made a joke, but not loud enough to hear. At Nettie's bakery, the old woman handed Clementine a basket of fresh loaves. "No charge," Nettie said. "Some things just need to be fed." Back at the cabin, the cradle waited near the fire. It was finished now. Seiko had carved her name into the base. Everly. Not Ray. Not Clementine. Just the part of her she'd buried and now reclaimed. She stood beside it, one hand resting on its edge. "I might never carry a child," she said. Seiko came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "Then we'll raise warmth," he said. "And that's more than most ever do." Outside, the snow still blanketed the earth. But inside, the fire was steady. And beside that fire, two souls, once unwanted, once unclaimed, stood woven together not by vows, but by something quieter. Recognition. If you're watching this from somewhere cold, somewhere no one said your name with gentleness in a long time, remember this. The storm cannot have the final word. Sometimes, the hand you take is the one you didn't know was reaching for you all along. And sometimes, being chosen isn't about being worthy. It's about surviving long enough to be seen.